Please subscribe to our channel, Pacific Front Untold, and be sure to leave a comment after watching a video.
Welcome back to Pacific Front Untold. In a previous video, we discussed the history of Imperial Japan's Hellships, repurposed merchant vehicles that were used to transport Allied prisoners of war during World War II. In this video, we'll be exploring the aftermath of one of the most notorious Hellships, the Oryoku Maru, where survivors of the wreck faced many more hellish stops on their journey, making it through a gruesome train ride, voyages on 2 ships filled with animal manure, and then being attacked at a midpoint harbor in their journey. Many prisoners of war were lost in this harrowing relay race back to Imperial Japan. On December 15, 1944, after facing air attacks from Allied planes for 2 days, the Oryoku Maru sank near Olangapo Naval Station in the Subic Bay of Luzon. Out of 1,619 prisoners of war on the ship, only about 1,300 made it to the tennis courts where they were held before transport. For the first 2 days, these already weak prisoners were not given food or medical care. Afterward, they were allowed only 5 spoonfuls of rice a day and some water from a tap. On December 21st, the prisoners of war were transported from Olangapo Naval Station to San Fernando, Pampanga, where they were held in a jail and movie theater. Before the journey, Japanese Lieutenant Jusaburo Toshino told Lieutenant Colonel E. Carl Engelhardt that prisoners who were too injured to make the rest of the journey were going to be sent back to Bilibid prison. However, instead of being sent where they were supposed to be sent, 15 gravely injured men were instead taken to a cemetery to be executed by decapitation or bayonet thrust and buried in a mass grave. On December 21st, the remaining prisoners were loaded onto trains and sent to San Fernando La Union. Many of the prisoners, who had been survivors of the Bataan Death March, were familiar with the grotesque conditions on these trains. Train windows were closed, and the prisoners suffered from the heat. Because American planes were circling above, looking for targets, the Japanese put the sick and wounded prisoners of war on the tops of the train cars and told them to wave their bandages if the American planes appeared. On Christmas morning, the prisoners made it to their destination, where they were held in a schoolhouse and later on a beach. Prisoners were allowed rations of 1 handful of rice and a canteen of water. Because they were so thirsty in the tropical sun, many of these prisoners resorted to drinking seawater, dying as a result. Come December 27th, the prisoners at San Fernando boarded the Maru Enoura Maru and set sail for Takao, Formosa, now Taiwan, through the Lingayen Gulf. To board, the men had to leap 20 to 25 feet straight down into the boats or to be pushed by bayonets of Japanese soldiers. Both ships had previously been hauling livestock, and there was no effort to clean out the animal manure before putting the prisoners in the hold, where they were also denied food during their journey. They make it to Takao on New Year's Day, 1945, where prisoners received their first meal in days, 5 moldy hard biscuits and some rice. Before setting sail for their next location, the 2 ships remained docked in Takao for repairs. But there was no opportunity for the prisoners to rest, as some of the worst was yet to come. During this time, on January 9th, General MacArthur's forces invaded Luzon, the region our prisoners had just departed from. To ensure against a counterattack from Japan, MacArthur's forces also attacked Takao, the ships in his harbor, such as the Brazil and Enoura Maru, being their primary targets. Bombers from the USS Hornet attacked the harbor. There were several hits on the Enoura Maru, and some bombs fell directly on the forward hold, killing more than 400 prisoners at once. As sirens signaled raids above, survivor John Jacobs described the scene. A young captain stood up and told the prisoners to sit where they were, that they were just as safe in one place as they were in another. Moments later, there was a blinding orange flash and a deafening explosion followed by blindness. When it was over, only 3 doctors remained to care for the 75 injured. The other surviving prisoners of war remained trapped in the ship's hold without food or water for days. The Japanese did nothing. The wounded continued to die from shock, loss of blood, and infection. Bodies of the dead even began to bloat and smell. Not until January 12th, several days later, were piles of dead prisoners of war allowed to be removed from the ship's hold. Using a large cargo net, 15 to 20 bodies at a time were lifted out of the hold by other prisoners of war, and according to one author, taken to shore on a barge where they were stacked with wood and set on fire. Another 150 was taken to a cemetery the following day. After performing these harrowing tasks themselves, the survivors of the second attack were moved from the Enoura Maru to the smaller Brazil Maru. The prisoners in the holds continued to suffer from the cold and lack of food, as well as no water or basic sanitation or medicine. Getting weaker, sicker, and increasingly demoralized, these prisoners were dying by the tens of dozens. Earlier, the tropical heat in the Philippine camps and the ship holds had been the number one cause of death for these prisoners stuffed underneath the decks. Now they faced the total opposite, the cold from the more northern climate. With the earlier attacks blowing holes in the ships and the hatches now gone, the temperature dropped swiftly. Wearing little clothing because they had just come from a tropical climate, the prisoners of war had little protection from the cold. Pneumonia, rather than a heat stroke or a tropical disease, was now the primary concern, killing prisoners by the numbers. Finally, on January 14th, they sailed for Moji, Japan, arriving there on January 29th. Of the 1,619 prisoners of war who boarded the Oryoku Maru back on December 14th, 1944, only 497 arrived in Moji. As E.R. House later noted in his diary, senior medical officers were asked to sign 1,001 death certificates representing our loss from December 13th to January 31st, a rather heavy toll. An estimated 500 more died aboard the Brazil Maru during the voyage from Takao to Moji. This was only in the span of a couple of weeks. However, even for the few that made it through the whole journey, more horrors awaited. They were now to be sent to several prisoner of war camps near Moji, Japan, which was part of the Fukuoka prisoner of war camp group, including camps like Moji No. 4 and the Moji Military Hospital. These camps were notorious for the gruesome treatment of prisoners of war, subjecting them to intense labor, torture, and starvation. If you found this video educational and want to learn more, make sure to subscribe to our channel and to visit the Pacific Atrocities Education website, where you can learn more and find out how you can support the mission to make sure these untold stories come to light.